And today we're starting a new series about Advent, and we're talking about Jesus being born to bring light. So as if I said, it's the first Sunday of Advent. Does anyone know what the word Advent means, or what it comes from, where it comes from? Apart from Sheila, who studied all these things, you know. Anyone else know? I only learned this morning about 2 hours ago when I was listening to the radio. All right, Sheila, come on then. Exactly, coming. And we know that Jesus is coming. So the period of Advent is a time to wait and to prepare for remembering to celebrate Jesus coming as a baby. And also, sometimes people also remember that he's coming again, because he's come as a baby, but he's coming again. We know as Christians that he's coming back. So the Advent season, it's a time of hope. Some Christians actually fast during Advent. You know, Advent can be very busy, can't it? Unfortunately, even as Christians, we get drowned in all the busyness of Christmas. Sometimes it's good to just sit and be quiet. So we're going to be looking this morning at being born to bring light, and we're going to look at Isaiah chapter 9. It's a passage that I think a lot of us will know very well. Isaiah chapter 9, starting at verse 1. Nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who are in distress. In the past, he humbled the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, but in the future, he will honor Galilee of the Gentiles by the way of the sea, along the Jordan. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of the shadow of death, a light has dawned. You have enlarged the nation and increased their joy. They rejoice before you as people rejoice at the harvest, as men rejoice when dividing the plunder. For as in the day of Midian's defeat, you have shattered the yoke that burdens them, the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor. Every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The zeal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this. So it's a passage that's very familiar to a lot of us, but I was struck for the first time about verse 1. There'll be no more gloom for those who were in distress. The people of Israel have been in a war. There's quite a lot of that going on in the Old Testament, isn't there? We've been looking at it over recent months. Always seem to be in a war. And Zebulun and Naphtali were two tribal groups in northern Israel, and they'd been crushed by the Assyrian army, probably before the defeat of the northern kingdom, which happened in 721 BC. So they were experiencing the despair of defeat, darkness, gloom. This word gloom. We're not in a battle situation, thank God, here in the UK. But maybe we also sometimes feel some sense of gloom. Even before the pandemic, people experience all other sort of sadnesses, pain. We've already heard mention this morning about bereavement. We've heard recently about climate change. We hear about the homeless people in our community. We hear about racism. And of course, again, this morning, we're reminded that the pandemic is far from over. For many people, the experience of the last 20 months has been a real time of darkness and gloom. People have lost human touch, human interaction. We've had to stay away from one another. And some people, as we remembered last Sunday evening, have actually lost family members and friends. People have died. And how hard to have a bereavement at a time when we have to isolate and we can't be with one another. So we know There has been a time of gloom. And here, as we're reading this passage in Isaiah, we also read in verse 6, where he talks about the Messiah. We see verse 6 as prophesying the coming of the Messiah. The Jewish people were actually under occupation. We don't really know what it can be like to be under occupation, but a couple of things, for example, we do know is that if a Jewish person was walking down the street and he passed a Roman soldier, the Roman soldier could say, "Carry my bag." And the Roman soldier might want his bag carrying to High Barnet, and the person might be going down to Palmer's Green. You'd have to go. You'd have to carry the soldier's bag. You had no freedom. They were subject to taxation. So here in the Old Testament, we hear about despair. In the New Testament also, it was hard for them. We have freedom. We don't have that experience. Although we know that the non-white people in our community sometimes do feel some sense of oppression. They don't always feel free and comfortable in our country, to our shame. It must be very hard to not feel respected in the community. It must feel very dark. So what's darkness like? Unfortunately, for the purpose of this morning, the sun is shining outside. I did think of creating a dark room. How do you feel when you're in darkness? What's it feel like? Fear? Cold? Nobody wants to come and see you, so you feel alone. Yes, there can be a deadly calm about it, can't there? I remember in the 1970s, there were a series of power cuts over about 3 weeks. And I remember doing my homework by candlelight, and then inevitably we all ran out of candles. I remember when I was working in Burkina, the very poor people didn't have light in their houses. And some of the children, when they went to school, they would go and sit under a street light in the main city to do their homework. You'd see them sitting by the side of the road doing their homework. I remember the first time I was taken out to a restaurant on the back of a motorbike. It's an outdoor restaurant, but it was all dark. The person who took me ordered the food, it was fish. And I sat in the dark trying to find this food and eat this food. It was quite an experience. We're very used to the light, and the dark can be very frightening. And of course, there's a lot of arguments at the moment about reducing street lights, because we want to help the climate, we want to save on power. And then the other side is people are frightened to walk in the streets if there's no street lights. Darkness. And some of us can stay in when it's dark and put a light on, but some people have to go to work. Who goes to work in the dark? Who have jobs that are in the dark? Nobody. Miners, fishermen. I was up in Scotland a couple of years ago, and one of the fishermen used to tell me that they went out late at night, 11 o'clock at night, because that's the best time to catch fish. Imagine going fishing in the night. And we're going to be hearing soon at Christmas about shepherds. They do their work in the day and in the night. And obviously all our emergency services are there 24/7, but they're often having to come in the night. And now we're in the winter, and we know that the days are very short. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who's looking forward, without wanting to rush time past, to when we have our longer sunny days. So when you're in darkness, you go into a room, what's the first thing you do? Turn the light on, or a torch, or light a match, light a candle. When I was in West Africa, we always had to have a candle and a match ready for when the lights went out, because they often went out in the middle of you cooking your dinner or something like that. Who, when they go out, leaves a light on upstairs? If you go out at night. Sheila doesn't. All right, I do. So we can talk about that afterwards. I once read a story by a converted burglar, and he said you should actually leave the bathroom light on, because every burglar knows the house is empty if you leave the hall light on. So I can't really remember his logic, but I always leave my bathroom light on. We're going to look at another passage in the Bible about light. And you all know it very well. Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, I'm starting to read at verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty, Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And what did God say? Let there be light. My, that must have been fantastic, don't you think? It's all dark and suddenly, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And he separated the light from the darkness. God saw that the light was good. Why did he need the light? Why was that the first thing that he created? Are you putting your hand up, Ivan? No. He needed the light first so he could see to create, and so he could see what had been created. So there's some things about light, and Sheila had just mentioned one. The first thing about light is that light reduces our fear. Light reduces fear. We said we go into a dark place, we put a light on. It calms our fears, it removes the shadows. That horrible thing about we don't know what's there. The unknown is very frightening, and light reduces our fear. You remember at the death of Jesus, one of the things that happened, darkness covered the whole earth. Must have been a very frightening experience for people. Saw these men being crucified, hundreds of men were being crucified every day. Horribly, it was a very, very common occurrence. But for this crucifixion of this person, Jesus, darkness covered the whole earth, and people were very frightened. Light reduces fear. And secondly, light helps us to see. I remember doing a fire training exercise many years ago, and we were told to go into a smoke-filled room and rescue the bodies that were in there. I can assure you they weren't real bodies, they were dummies. I was working in the health service, as some of you know. We'd never been in that room before, and we had to go in and find the dummies and get them out of the room. But we couldn't see a thing. And what was worse, we hadn't been in that room before, so we didn't know what the shapes were. We didn't know what furniture was there. We were crashing into things. We couldn't see. Light helps us to see. We can avoid obstacles. We can walk directly to the place we want to get to. Sometimes it comes gradually, but sometimes it's sudden. The world is dark because it's disconnected from God. But when he sent his son, it was like switching the light on, wasn't it? He gave us the connection back. We're going to look at a verse in John chapter 12. John, in case you don't know, is a gospel that talks a lot about light. Always talking about light. You could go through it and see how many times you find the word light in John. John chapter 12, verse 46. Jesus said, I have come into the world as a light so that no one who believes in me should stay in darkness. We know that in our world, light and dark coexist, don't we? And we know the story in Matthew. You remember the story of the farmer who sowed seed, but then weeds came up as well. And the weeds and the good seed grew together. We do have light and dark coexisting, but with Jesus, we know that we have light. There's another lovely verse in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 8, when Paul tells us, you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. So once we have been helped to see, we need to help others to help to see. Once we belong to Jesus, our lives are illuminated by him so that we can be pure and true and lights. And then our challenge, as we were singing earlier, is to shine his light into dark corners of the world. So light reduces fear. Light helps us to see. And light brings life. Light brings life. And we saw that in Genesis, didn't we? That God said, let there be light. And then he went on to create, to bring life. We talked earlier about darkness being a despairing time, a sad time. How do you feel if you have light? When you pull the curtains this morning and the sun was shining, how did you feel? Light helps us to feel hopeful, doesn't it? It helps us to feel positive. The light of dawn helps you think there's a new day coming. Let's start again. And if we look again at our passage in Isaiah, We read that there was bloodshed and there was war, as I was saying earlier. But we also know there's hope, because in verse 6 we read a child is born. New creation, hope, life. We know that the new baby comes from the darkness of the womb to the light of the earth, of the world. We know that plants don't usually flower underneath the soil. We know they're germinating in the dark of the soil, but it'd be a bit strange, wouldn't it, if the flowers were flowering under the soil? They need the light. When the plants shoot up and they see the light, that's when we see the flowers. I've got an orchid and I was given it last year and it was flowering beautifully, but it stopped flowering. And it's very comfortable. The leaves look very healthy. It's got roots coming, but no flower now for over a year. And I'm thinking it's not getting enough light. So I will report back in a few months because I've moved it to be near the light. We all need the light to be able to grow. And Jesus is our light. And Jesus said he wasn't only a light for the Jewish people, of whom he was one, but he was a light for the Gentiles. In Isaiah chapter 42, and there's again lots of verses about it in the Bible, but he reminds us of that in Isaiah verse 42. He says, I will keep you and I will make you a covenant for the people and a light for the Gentiles. And he says it again in Isaiah 49, that he is, I find the right verse, I will make you a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring my salvation to the ends of the earth. So the point I'm making about this is not the distinction between Jews and Gentiles, but that Jesus is a light for everyone. He wasn't a light for just his own people. I'm a Jew, so I'm looking after the Jews. He's a light for everyone. Jesus was born to bring light, and he told us that himself. If we go back to the book of John, as I said, it's got a lot of things in it about light. John chapter 8, when Jesus spoke again to the people, he said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And we know that it's life because you remember what happened in John when Jesus went to see his friend Lazarus, who'd already died. And what happened? What happened when Jesus went to see Lazarus? Is that an arm or is it just a waving around, James? Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. So Jesus was the light and Jesus brings life. And he brought his friend Lazarus back to life, didn't he? So we know that light reduces fear. We know that light helps us to see. And we know that light brings us life. But that's not just an academic thing that we understand. What does it mean for us? It means for us that we can become sons of light. In John 12, we're told, John 12, verse 36, put your trust in the light while you have it, so that you may become children of light. So God's light through Jesus helps us to be a light and to have light. And his light was so shining in us that it gives us light. There's a lovely verse I'm going to give you from Corinthians when I found Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6. For God said, let light shine out of darkness to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of God in the face of Christ Jesus. So we have the light that came at Christmas, the light from God through Jesus. It's come to give us light, but now we have to share that light with others because we don't want to be selfish, do we? And keep something just to ourselves. And that light also makes us hopeful when it's dark and when we've got the gloom of despair. You know, I preached at the beginning of this year and we were talking about hope. And we're at the end of the year, we're talking again about hope and light and how light gives us hope.